Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3, the bottom of page 1255. Aleph Reish Nun Hey. So based on the long discussion of the growth and development and maturation of human emotions, especially those of the Nefesh Elokis, the divine soul, the three general stages of Mutfa, Murgish, Muskul, which are all a state of growth and development. And as he said earlier on page 1220, that's why Gan Eden is actually called a garden. A garden is known for the things that grow in it, the beautiful trees and flowers and so on. Specifically the trees in Gan Eden, the different trees, Vayita, that God planted, Hashem Elokim, God planted a garden. So what is the analogy of that? The analogy of that is the avodah of a person like a garden where things grow. And specifically, it's referring to Zah. Zah is the Midas Elyenus in Atzilus, from which evolve, Nishtalshal Mehem, as he says in Tanya, from there evolves the faculties called our emotions. So therefore, you see the connection. It's not just that Gan Eden, and he went off into talk about Midas. Midas itself, and he started this on page 1220. On the top of the page, you'll see, he says, Ki Adam Eitzah Soda. The person, a human Adam, is the Eitz Hasoda, tree in the field. First, the Adam Shala Kisei, as we learned yesterday as well, which is called Nikra Eitz Hasoda. That the person, the Adam Elyon, the supernal man, which means the structure of Atzilus, which is structured like a human, or I should say the other way around, the human being that created the divine image is structured like the structure of Atzilus. We have Chabad, Chagas, Nihi, the right side, the left side, the center. Exactly, the human structure mirrors and reflects the divine structure of Atzilus. So the Eitzah Soda, he says, Zod Atzilus, which is Ikra Adam, he says, Adam B'chal B'chinas Hamidus. It's Adam Eitzah Soda. And now, so the midas, which are governed by what? By Binah, the mother of the children is Ema Bonim Smecha, the mother, the Ema Revetzes al Afrechim, or Ema Revia al Bnin. So the mother is Binah, and that's why Gan Eden is the level of Binah. It originates from Chochma, Nor Yotzeme Eden, Gan Eden. Eden is Chochma, the river that runs into Gan Eden is Binah, and Binah gives birth to these emotions. So that's the story of Gan Eden. So in discussion, Gan Eden, we're talking now Gan Eden as it's by its natural, Gan Eden by its creation, and what happens to Gan Eden through the gardeners, which is us, that the Avodah of Adam and Chava La'avda L'Shomer, where they produce and develop the garden, that it should produce a lot more than what it was originally, what it naturally would achieve on its own. So in explaining that in the last paragraph where we talked about that you have the growth of the Midas, the growth of these trees, so to speak, the growth of Gan Eden, as much as it can grow naturally. And then the Aveda, he said on the top of the page, the Abba Ve'ima. What grows naturally, the emotions, and also the mother taking care of her children, that is still a natural process. It is growth, no question, just like the trees in Gan Eden grow, but it's still a growth within the hatfa, like he called it, within the wiring, the natural structure. If you want to go beyond the natural structure, which means to achieve more, an er chodash, something that was never there before, that requires the avodah. What type of avodah? The avodah of b'chol ma'idecha, with the emotions. The midas go completely outside of their initial wiring with their all-consuming love to God, and that in turn elevates Binah to its atzmius, to its core, and that in turn causes Binah and Chochma to stand and gaze at Arich and Atik and Keser and the highest levels of divine transcendence, all the way to Atzmus and Sof, where souls are rooted, higher than Torah, and in turn, that causes that also godless Abba, the godless of Chochma, not just of Binah, also elevates Zah and Malchus to its state. So they're all on this higher level. This is all through Avodah, as we learned in the previous paragraph. The next paragraph, which we began yesterday, was the inyan in this. He went into the pasuk Yizbu Atzei Hashem. That we're talking now the trees of Hashem, the divine trees, or specifically Havaya, as the Zohar explains. Why is, according to the Ramaz, why are the trees singled out as being Atzei Hashem, and not and other things that were created, mountains and springs and other things God created? Because these are the Atzei of Gan Eden, and Gan Eden, Shem Havaya, reigns in Gan Eden in a revealed way. In the rest of the world, the rest of the world, it's Alakim, Shem Alakim. But Vayita Havaya Alakim, Shem Olei, is in Gan Eden. And he compared it to the Mochin HaMikdash, because he said, Yedu, Beis HaMikdash, Yubedugmis HaGan Eden. The Beis HaMikdash, in somewhat, was similar to the Garden of Eden of the beginning of time. In what sense? That there's more revealed the divine there. Like he said, Ochin, Yesh Havaya b'mokim hazeh. Indeed, there's Havaya in this place, Yaakov said. And he explained, Asar Mamor, less than Asar Hedjet. The rest of the world is created through so-called the quote-unquote ordinary or regular language of God. Asar Mamoris, Hedjet, million de Hedjeta. But if you want to have the expression of God from his more inner core, that's Havaya, that's Gan Eden. Okay, Lignuni, Mochin she'ikar b'tchila. And the same thing with the Beis HaMikdash. People 3 times a year they would go to see and to be seen by Hashem. And what does it mean to see? Gili alakus, hasagas muhus alakus, like it was in Gan Eden. Not just mitzias, but also appreciation, understanding of the personality of the divine, as it was in the Beis HaMikdash. So that's Atzei Havaya. Then, what level does this manifest in? These trees. So that's he continues. The Ramaz continues with. I'm still summing up what we learned yesterday. Isa, but Ramasham, that this is the level of Zohar Ampin, the Midas Elyonis Zohar Ampin, Hanikristam b'Shem Havaya. That means Atzei Havaya Gilib China Zoh Hanikri Ilona Dechaya, the trees of life. Like, and then he brings from the Zohar Hayesh Ba Eitz Im Ayin, that Im Yesh Ba Eitz, that there's the Eitz can be mekabel from the level of Zah, Ilona Dechaya, and not from something higher, or is it being mekabel Im Ayin from the level of Ayin, the level of Kesed? And that's what Moshe was saying. We're soon going to learn more about this. This is obviously you're going to see is the trees on their own are the level of Zah. That is, and then the higher levels when they're receiving from the level of Ayin of Kesed, which is going to come through Avodah. But he hasn't mentioned that yet. He just brought the Zohar. And then we can continue. He repeats what he said back on page 1220, that the Adam Eitzah Soda is going on the Adam Elyon that sits on the throne, that level is Eitzah Soda. And he brings from the Maimer, B'yem Hashmini, it says, Ben Chochem Yismach Av, Pei Gimel. I should look. I didn't have a chance to look there, but it could be there's more information there. And that means that the midas are the level of tzemeach. This level, like trees that grow from a more infant stage to growth to a more mature stage. They mature, not like letters. So Zohar is called the tree of the field. That's where we reached. This is 5 lines from the bottom of page 1255. So now we'll continue the discussion. Now we also see from all of this that Gan Eden, though it's such a central component, especially in the story of Genesis, in the beginning of Chumash, of the Torah, you see come alive more than just, a garden. Why was it a garden? Why wasn't it a field? Why wasn't it a mountain or a valley? That it actually captures, because Gan Eden is exactly a perfect metaphor for the avodah of our work, of making things grow. And namely, making things grow within our own amidus, the maturing of our own emotional states, that we grow from katnus to godless, like a tree. And of course, there's the stages of natural growth, and then the stages that come from Aveda that bring in even more levels of growth, which we'll learn shortly. But meanwhile, we're still talking about Atzei Hashem. We didn't talk about Yizbu. Yizbu, that the trees of Hashem, godly, that are Yizbu, are sated. That's already a higher level in Atzei Hashem. But before we get to that, he's continuing Atzei Hashem, and you see how it all comes together. Gan Eden, the meaning of Gan Eden, the trees in Gan Eden, and of course the avodah that we do, that we gain reward in stored, and we gain reward in Gan Eden, and then there's the Gan Eden on its own that's higher than the elements, but still not yet sated, that will come through the avodah that we do, which we'll discuss shortly. But he's going to now add something else in this concept of Eitz. So the Eitzim in Gan Eden are getting even a deeper element here. So he says like this now. I'm reading 5 lines from the bottom of Aleph Reish Nun Hey, 1255. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Okay. V'hinei, and now Eitz, the word Eitz, tree, hu gam kein loshen Eitzah. It also comes from the term, expression, Eitzah, advice. U'kemoi li Eitzah v'tzeishia, where it says in the pasuk, to me, Eitzah is counsel, advice, and Shia, strength, salvation. Like when you say, so you see the word that. So you see that the Eitzah bechinas Chochma. What is Eitzah? Eitzah is the advice of a wise person. In this case, it could be advice of Hashem, but he's adding now that Eitz also has the word counsel in it, or advice, and that is the level of Chochma. However, this is the level of wisdom that is reishes sheishtalshlus. As we know, the 10 spheres always begin with Chochma. So Chochma is called reishes sheishtalshlus because it's the first of the 10 spheres of the cosmic order. So it's called reishes sheishtalshlus. V'alzeh omar gamkein hayesh ba'etz im ayin. Remember we said before from the Zohar, hayesh ba'etz im ayin, that on this also we say the level hayesh ba'etz, is there a tree im ayin, which means is there no tree, but ayin is also the level of ayin. Why? Because the v'hachochma ma'ayin to Mochin. The word ayin can also apply to keser. That's what he said before, but it also can apply to chochma. That's why we say v'chochma ma'ayin to Mochin. Literally, it means chochma. From whence does it come? From where does it come? Ma'ayin. But you could also read it not as a question, as a statement, and that's how Chassidus interprets it so often. Chochma comes from the level of ayin. So chochma originates in ayin, which is keser actually, but chochma is called ayin. Ma'ayin to Mochin. Al derech yesh ma'ayin. Like when we say yesh ma'ayin, what does that mean? So we usually translate something from nothing, but it's really not from nothing. Ayin means we don't relate to it, so we call it ayin. It's beyond us, beyond our understanding. In volume 2 at the end, he spoke about why it's called ayin. So ayin means that it's a leap. When you say yesh mi yesh, so it's one object reshaped. I take a piece of clay and I shape it into a pot. That's yesh mi yesh. They relate to each other. You can easily trace the source. Or if I give you a cup of water, so here's a pitcher, and yesh mi yesh, the water you can trace its source, and they actually are in common. They have something in common. They're actually the same thing. It's just reshaped or redirected. When it comes to yesh ma'ayin, the key thing to remember that there's a leap. The yesh cannot identify its source. That doesn't mean there's no source. Chassidus asks the question, what do you mean from nothing? Is God nothing? You say something from nothing. Nothing means from my world of something, this thing seems like it's nothing because it's beyond me. So it's like when a person has a flash of an idea, where did that come from, you say? It's actually coming from somewhere, but it's coming from a collective superconscious state that from our perspective is on the other side of the curtain. It's like ayin. So yesh ma'ayin is really a reference just to a relationship that the two entities don't have anything in common. That mostly don't have anything in common, and one cannot trace to the other. The yesh cannot see the ayin. It's like behind the curtain. It's beyond. It's something beyond. Where yesh be yesh, the yesh can identify its source, like a parent and a child. That's yesh be yesh. Even though it says in Chassidus that the birth of a child has an element of yesh ma'ayin, because obviously to give birth to a life is quite a miraculous thing. It's like, it's from a seed and an egg, you suddenly have a life. But still, you can trace it to some extent. Real yesh ma'ayin is where the ayin is so-called invisible to the yesh. So therefore, when he says hayesh bo eitz im ayin, he says you can also say it applies to Chochma. U'kamei sha'imrim beida kadeshim. When we say beida kadeshim, what means beida? Created kadeshim, the holy ones. Why is it called beida? Because Chochma and Binah, compared to Keser, are called Bria Shebat Silas. So you can say Beira Kadeshim, Kadeshim referring to Chochma and Binah. Kamesha Kosav, B'dibra Maschel Es Shabsesei Tishmeru, Uba'abir Divaschanam. It's giving us two sources. This is most likely L'Kutei Torah. The Maimah of Shabsesei Tishmeru is in Bahar. And the biur, meaning the biur, there's a mimer and its explanation, talking about the explanation of Vaschanon in most likely, as I said, L'Kutei Torah. Okay, so what do we have now? We have that Chochma. When you say Ayin, im Ayin, Eitz can also refer to Chochma, as in Eitzah, and because you say Eitz connected to the level of Ayin. Now, what is this referring to? This is calling the outer dimension of Chochma, not the inner dimension of Chochma. Okay, let me just stop for a moment. I want to just refer you, because this may be helpful to understand the next section. So, back on page, oh, this goes back a long while. Ani Rishon v'ani Achron. Yeah, on page 1214, the Rebbe Rasha brought, if you remember, that there's Rishon and there's Reishis. Both are beginnings, but Rishon, he said, is more removed from that which follows, and Reishis is more attached. That's why Rashi says, he explains on page 1213, Rashi says that wherever it says Reishis, Dovuk ela achrus, like Bereshis bara lekim. That means it's connected to that which follows. Rishon means the first. It also is the first of many, of others, but it's removed. So he explained that Reishis is Chochma and Rishon is Keser. And on page 1214, he explained the difference between the Ayin of Keser and the Ayin of Chochma. This is also earlier in Ayin Beis. I just wanted to point it out because I think it's going to be very relevant here. Ayin, of course, is Bittul. So the Ayin of Keser, he said, is like a Yud that doesn't even have any shape and form. And the Ayin of Chochma is the Yud that already has a Keitzei Lamaila, Keitzei Lamato. And when you make a Yud, it's not just a dot, there also has a little thing on top and a thing on the bottom, a Keitz, edge, a point. So he explained the difference between Ayin of Keser and Ayin of Chochma. Okay, so I just wanted to point it out because here you see also Hayesh Eitz Imayin. First he said, is Eitz coming from the level of Zah, or is it coming from the level of Ayin from Keser? Now he's saying that we could also say it refers to Chochma, and that's the connection to Eitzah. Eitz from the word Eitzah coming from Chochma, and Chochma is Reishis Shtalshlus, the level of Ayin of a Chochma Ma'ayin Timotza, which is like a Bria Shebatzilus. So it's an Atzilus already, but in the Atzilus itself is the highest level. It's the highest level, and it's the level called Ayin, but he's referring it to Chitzenius HaChochma. Now remember, we learned that link, Chitzenius of Chochma, Chitzenius of Binah, and then there's the Yichud Pnimi of Chochma and Binah. The Chitzenius is still connected more to the natural structure of the father and mother as it relates to Midas to Zah in their natural structure. And that does not create an Er Chadash, because there's a Zivug Eloi Shlim. It's not a complete union. It's Yichud Chitzeni of Chochma and Binah. So he's saying now the Ayin that he just said Eitzah as Eitz on its own is connected to Chitzenius Chochma. And he's going to elaborate a bit about this. I just want to put it in context so we see it's not going off some tangent here. This is all part of the discussion. So he says now the following. Okay. And now he qualifies. But elsewhere it says that Chochma is Atzilus within Atzilus, not Bria in Atzilus. And what it says elsewhere, the Chochma b'chinas Atzilus sheba Atzilus. It says that in many places. that when you break Atzilus in Atzilus itself, the four levels, Chochma is Atzilus Shabbatzilus, Bria Shabbatzilus is Binah, Zoh Shabbatzilus is Yitzira Shabbatzilus, and Malchus Shabbatzilus is Asiyah in Atzilus. But you now said Beira Kadeshim that also Chochma is Bria Shabbatzilus. Yesh Ma'ayin, Yesh from an Ayin. So he says Zeu B'chinas Eir HaChochma. Where it says Atzilus Shabbatzilus, we're talking about the light, the energy of Chochma. Page 1256, next page. So basically in Chochma itself, there are levels. There's the level of Chochma, Chetzenis Chochma, which we'll talk about in a moment more, he's going to discuss. And then there's the energy, the Eir within Chochma, that's higher than containers. That level is Atzilus Shabbatzilus. Shahari Mavur Sham. Now what's the Sham? On the bottom of last page, he says, Mochin Macher. The Mochin Macher is now giving us that place. Why he says it the second time, I'm not sure. But the Mochin Macher is the drush, the famous drush, Gimel Mine Adam. See, Hashari Mavur Sham. Where's the Sham? He didn't mention Gimel Mine Adam. So you have to say, Kamishkos Mochin Macher is drush Gimel Mine Adam. Just a few words about this drush. This is a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, one of the most fundamental mimerim that Tzemach Tzedek elaborates upon and becomes a very big basis of a lot of the deep ideas about Eir and Atzilus and so on. This Drush Gimel Mine Adam, the Alter Rebbe, as I said, delivered. The Tzemach Tzedek has it printed. It's printed in Eira Teira Bolok and Eira Teira in Yonim, if you want to look it up. It's a very, very, I mentioned it a number of times. That Rebbe Rashab himself mentioned it several times in Ayin Beis. It talks about Gimel Mine Adam, means the three levels of Adam. Adam of Bria, Adam of Yitzira, Adam of Asiyah. Both Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah, the Klolos, and the Pratis, macrocosm, microcosm. That's all from that mimer. That whole discussion of how the worlds are structured. And you have Atzilus the Klolos before the Tzimtzum, and you have Bria the Klolos is Ak, Yitzira the Klolos is Akudim and Akudim, and Asiyah the Klolos in macrocosm is Atzilus Bria Yitzira Asiyah the Pratis in microcosm. So you have them both in microcosm, macrocosm. There he talks about that in Atzilus itself, you have all four worlds, all four dimensions. And he says there that Chochma is Atzilus Shabbatzilus. So the Rebbe Rashab is answering, that's Eira Chochma, that's higher than containers. Shahari Mavur Sham. Because it's there, it's explained there. Where there? In this Bedrush, Gimel Mine Adam, in this Drush, in this Mimer, Shakelim Ba'eris HaMislapshim B'Teichim Heim B'chinas Biyah. The Kelim and the Kelim of Atzilus and the Eiras that manifest in them, that's Biyah. That's Bri Yitzir Nasir Atzilus. V'Madrega Hadalad, and the fourth level, the Atzilus within Atzilus, Hu B'chinas Ha'er Shalamayla Ma'Kelim. That's referring to the energy that's higher than the containers. He explains there that the containers break into three, but the Eir has a fourth dimension that's higher than containers. That's Atzilus Shabbatzilus, and that's the Chochma that is referring to there. What we're discussing here is the outer dimension of Chochma as it already relates to Binah, as he says, like he says, and this was explained also above. I'm going to stop shortly for any questions, but let me just finish the subject. In Chochma, there's also containers. Yes, it's a very small container, but they're containers. So based on this, Chochma is Bria. So the answer is, that's the outer dimension of Chochma relates to Kelim, containers. The inner dimension, that's an energy that's higher than containers. So what I said earlier, the Rebbe Rashab, what we said earlier, that im ayin, hayesh eitz, im ayin, ayin is referring to Chochma, we're referring to eitz and Chochma as it is chetzenis Chochma. That relates to Kelim. That's why it's called yesh ma'ayin, because it's like Bria, because it's the lower level of Chochma that is a form of Bria yesh ma'ayin. So a few more lines, and then I'm gonna pause. So now the parenthesis he adds, v'chein b'pnimius Binah, and it's the same as in Pnimius Binah. Binah also has a chetzenius and a pnimius. So he says also the inner dimension of Binah, of understanding, comprehension, is also like that. It has an element of more oir and less keli. He's not saying there's no keli, but he's just comparing it to Pnimius Binah too, which is relevant to our discussion, because remember, Zivuk Shlim, the total union is the Pnimius Binah, or even Atzmius Binah, and Chochma, and Pnimius Chochma. So he's going to say it like this. Mashenkin, I'm sorry, Ubechlolos ha'eses firis, hu b'chinas Pnimius hakav, and you also find this inner dimension in the general 10 spheres. That's the Pnimius hakav, u'kameshikosa b'sidr b'inyan tlosas the zimnim mekadesh. In the Siddur, this is the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe, of the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim on Siddur. He speaks about it in that Maimer. The three different Sudas, the three different meals. Not the three Sudas, I'm sorry. The three that Amakazi have. Ikerhu b'chinas ha-Chochma. So even though we have the element of a Pnimius also in Binah, and all the Esser spheres, the inner dimension of the Kav, they also carry a certain element of that's higher than just Bria, some element of Atzilus. That's why it's all in Atzilus. But the Iker is in Chochma, commotion is bar the il, become duchtin or become drushim, as was explained earlier in a number of drushim, a number of duchtin, different discourses. But the point he wants to make here is that, as I very often emphasize, in Chassidus, there's no such thing as black and white levels. Everything includes everything else. So when you want to have a deeper level of bittul, a deeper level of connection to the divine, it's there even in all the 10 spheres, in Atzilus and in Binah, but it's in the Pnimius of them. And the primary place is where it's dominant is in Chochma. So it's not a contradiction. It's all about discovering, identifying the level, and then recognizing how that level can be found in all other levels. So in other words, that's like we say in Atzilus, there's Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, Asi, and Atzilus. What does that mean? Is it Atzilus or is it Bria? The answer is because each world has all 4 dimensions in it. Bria also has Atzilus Sheba Bria, Bria Sheba Bria, Yitzir Sheba Bria, and Asiya Sheba Bria. Just like we say by spheres, Chesed has Gvura in Chesed, has Teferes in Chesed. So, but primarily, what is Atzilus? Is Atzilus Sheba Atzilus, is Chochma in Atzilus, because Chochma is the dominant feature in Atzilus. That's why it's the highest level of the bittul in the world, because it's completely aligned with the divine. Iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'gamu echad. Bria and Atzilus, subtly, you're starting to have something that's beginning to identify as some type of identity, and that is the Chochma, Chitzenius Chochma, or what he called the Kalim of Chochma. Now, going back, let's just finish this piece about Eitzah Havaya. So how does that relate? We said Eitzim is from the word Eitzah, a device, Chochma. V'zeh inyan Eitzah Havaya. And this is the inyan, the trees of Havaya. The Havaya b'Chochma. Havaya is in Chochma. Atzei Havaya, who should tzrichim Eitzah echi agili d'shem Havaya. So since Havaya is b'Chochma, like we learned earlier, then Havaya is in Chochma. So that's Havaya. But what's Eitzah Havaya? So he says Eitzah Havaya, interesting expression, that they need Eitzah, they need counsel and advice and guidance. How should Shem Havaya, how should the revelation from Shem Havaya come? In other words, Shem Havaya is a revelation of Chochma. And the Eitzah Havaya is how Chochma is going to be channeled, as he's going to explain now what that means, what the Eitzah is exactly. But before I continue, let me stop here. If anybody wants to ask anything. So now he's going to explain what means Eitzah Havaya, the Eitzah Havaya, the Chochma, Eitzah Havaya.
Yeah, I was wondering how you could have or in Atzilus without Kalim, that the whole idea of Atzilus is that it's everything is in Kalim. It would seem like or without, that's higher than Kalim, not in Kalim would be or a Sovev, which would be not Mamale, which is, the 4 worlds are Mamale, it seems.
Well, like I just said, there's no black and white. Atzilus number 1 has in its Sovev 2. That's correct. There's a Keser in Atzilus. That's number 1. Secondly, this is not necessarily Sovev. He didn't say without a Keli does not make it necessarily a Makif. It just means the has not yet entered into a Keli. So it could be Mamala that's just not entered into a Keli, which is actually what it is. So Atzilus, like all worlds, is a complex world. It's like asking the question, Earth. Earth is a planet that has many aspects to it. It's just like there's doimim tzemeach chai medaber, there's also a doimim within medaber, and there's a tzemeach within medaber, and there's a chai within medaber. So the fact that there's Atzilus in general is a world of 10 spheres that are aligned with the divine. So when you break it down, there are spheres where the Kalim are more dominant. There's spheres where the Ur is more dominant. And then there's spheres where the Ur is not yet really become a Keli yet. Like the first spark of Chochma, as it comes from Keser, is still abstract enough that you say it doesn't yet have a Keli. Then as Chochma begins to manifest, it's all in a split second, it has the Keli called a Yud. So there's elements in Chochma that are higher than Keli. So let's not get technical. Just remember, Ur is Bittel, Keli is Metzias. It would be like saying in Atzilus, is there any level of Bittel without the Metzias? Absolutely. There's even in Bria levels of Bittel and Metzias. So the words are just words. Ur refers to something that is not yet manifest in structure. So Atzilus has an element of that. Obviously, in the full-blown sense of it, it's higher worlds than Atzilus. But in Atzilus itself, there's that state, and then there's the next state, and the next state as it goes further down into as it further becomes further structure. So that's the point in this.
Would you also say that there's Panemius Zaw, Kesed Word Ferris also could be an ore that is not yet Malubush in the Midos?
He just said it in the parentheses. He said, "V'cheinu b'pnimius Binah, u'b'cholos esespheres u'b'chinas pnimius hakav." In other words, there is an element in all the spheres that there's a panemius of the kav. It's not their dominant feature, but they all, remember, originate from levels that are higher. He doesn't go into exactly to say that they have an Ur without a Keli, because generally Kelim are very prominent there. But in a certain way, as a person connects to B'chol Moedecha, which is higher than Kelim in a way, because you go B'chol Avavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, and then you become all-consuming love to God, you can say it has an element that's higher than Keli because you're connecting to something that's beyond structure. But the goal is to bring it into the structure. Remember, Shuv, it has to come downward as well. So there is an element of Ava Karish Be'esh, what he said on top of page, that's a while back, on page 1247, that you have to also have bring it back Shuv. But there's an element in every Ratzeh and Shuv, in every Avodah of a person, there should be an element where you're reaching, like the flame that is rising and defying gravity. It's like leaving the wick. The wick is the Keli. The Ur is trying to reach upward, but the Keli keeps it grounded. So every type of yearning, any longing, any state of Ur is always going to be seeking levels that are beyond Kelim. However, the Ur is compelled to stay within the Keli, and it needs to be there too. So you have all these elements in Ayin Beis, volume 1, and probably volume 2 as well. He spoke about levels in Ur, that in Ur itself, there's a level that is a Ur that's in a Keli, there's the Ur right above the Keli, and there's the Ur in its root, which is still a Ur Pnimi, but it's beyond yet ready to enter Kelim. It's like the difference between when you look at Keiches HaNefesh. So we say there's Eitzah HaNefesh, the Nefesh carries within it faculties. And then we say like this, there's Keiches Atzmim, there's Keiches Hiyulim, there's Keiches Nalamim, and there's Keiches Gluyim. So when I'm using my hand right now, let's say to write a word, even before I write that word, my hand has the power to write a word. And that power originates in the earlier stage, all the way back to the Nefesh. So the Ur in Keli is, when I'm actually writing it, you see the execution of it. But the Ur in Keli is there even before I begin to write. It's ready to write any given moment. And when you go deeper, the Ur is there. It may not yet be in the Keli, but it's there in the Nefesh. Think of like a person who, God forbid, has a stroke. And they have the power to speak, but it doesn't come out in words. Why? Because the Ur is there, but the Ur is not being, and the Keli are not able to really communicate. So there's levels of Ur, like Chassidus brings the example of a blind, God forbid, blind parents give birth to a seeing child. Because in the Nefesh, the Kei Hariyah is intact, the Ur is there. The problem is either the keli is damaged or the nerve, the optic nerve, or something that connects the Eir to the keli. My point is that Eirs go through many, many levels as they enter into kelim, and it all comes down to which level you're talking about. So here, this is not the discussion in this mimer, all these levels, but since you brought up the question, there's clearly levels, and generally speaking, there's the level of Eir that's higher than kelim, which he's calling Atzilus Sheba Atzilus, which is Primus Chochma. It also exists in the spheres, but primarily in Chochma. But here we're talking about Eitzah Havaya, we're talking about Chochma, Chitzenius Chochma, that manifests in Keli, what he called Bria, Ayin. And now he said the Eitzah Havaya is that Shitzirichem Eitzah Echiyah Gilid D'Shem Havaya. Now, as you see, I explained this simply to explain the pshat here, but you have to remember, Chassidus is vast. I try to keep this focus to what we're learning here. You're not going to be able to learn all of Chassidus in one place. Different places talk about different things. So that's why I make the choices sometimes to answer, sometimes not to fully answer, because I don't want to digress from the theme here. The theme here, so let's make it very clear, is not about Eris and Kalim. The theme here is about Eitzah Havaya, talking about the trees that are also from the word Eitzah. Now, Shatzichem Eitzah Echiyah Gilid D'Shem Havaya. So Eitzah Havaya is talking about the Eitzah. So what is this Eitzah? But does anyone else have any questions before I continue? Okay. So what is the Eitzah? Va'Eitzah hu inyan had tzimtzum. That's the tzimtzum. That's the tzimtzum. That's the tzimtzum. In other words, Havaya is the Gili of Chochma. The Gili of Chochma it's talking obviously in Gan Eden because connected to Eitzah Havaya. And the Eitzah Havaya is how this Gili should manifest. So you need to have a tzimtzum, because without tzimtzum, it's not going to flow properly. He adds a vav. You would think he'd say had tzimtzum liyas hamshacha. So clearly he's talking about two things here. One is tzimtzum is diminishing the flow or somewhat concealing it, and that it should become in a state that it can go in a seder v'adrag, in an organized way. What is an eitzah? What's ultimately an eitzah? Let's say you have a plan to do something. Before you implement it, you go talk to a wise counselor, to a consultant, to an advisor, and you give them and say, please help me. How do I plan this? How do I do it properly? Whatever the venture it is, whether it's a project, whether it's a business. So Eitzah is essentially the proper advice and counsel that gives you the ability to how to implement it. So how does the Havaya of Chochma, so-called implemented? That's the Eitzah of Tzimtzum, and that it should be in an orderly fashion, Seder v'Hadraga. And what is that Seder v'Hadraga? These are Vehain Hadalad Eisi is the Shem Havaya. These are the four letters of Shem Havaya. Yud, Tzimtzum. So Yud is a Tzimtzum, it's concentrated point. Second, Hey, Hispashtus. And then it comes and expands, which is usually Binah, it expands. Is he saying the other two here? I don't think so, not yet. But I'll just mention them because he's not saying it because it's probably not relevant to the discussion. But the next two, Vav, is Hamshacha, like a line. Think of it like a pipe that transmits from the Hey downward, that's Zah. And the final Hey is Malchus, the recipient. So when a teacher teaches, Chassidus explains, and the same thing, it's an example for above, the way the Eibishter created the whole shtalshlus is all Yud Kei Vav Kei. Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiyah, Chochma Binah Zah Malchus. And what is that? First, you have to make sure that the energy is focused, concentrated, and limited, because if without that, you don't have a tzimtzum, the student and the recipient will be overwhelmed. The next is, it needs to expand into a language now that you are able to express it. Vav is the Hamshacha, you transmit it. And in other words, the Hey is after the Tzimtzum, the idea as is going to be conveyed. The Vav is the Hamshacha, and the Malchus is the Hey, the final Hey that receives is also an expanded say, like the Keli, in that sense. Well, I don't want to use the word Keli, not to confuse it with what we just learned. but at the end of the day, it's Malchus. As a matter of fact, there's a Nos and Titin, and the pasuk that says in Chumash, in Dvarim, that Nos and Titin you should give. So it says there the expression. I'm just trying to remember Nos and Titin Hashem, that it connects. That tzedakah is connected to Havaya. So the Arizal says, I believe it's the Arizal, that therefore, when you give charity, so you have Yud Kei Vav Kei as well. The Yud is the coin. The Hey is the hand, the 5 fingers of the giver. The Vav is when you stretch out your hand, and the final Hey is the 5 fingers of the recipient. So the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, as an example of transmission. So, going back to the theme here, so these are the Dal Eitzah, the Shem Havaya. So Havaya is in Chochma, Atzei Havaya is the Eitzah. And what is the Eitzah? Is the Tzimtzum and these steps that draw down the Havaya of Chochma, V'hainu. The Liyas B'chinas Chochma, Reishis, Eishtalshlus, Tzorich Liyas Adiyat Tzimtzum. This means, for Chochma to become, like he said at the bottom of last page, Reishis Eishtalshlus, the beginning of the order. Shtalshlus here is the order of the spheres, the order of the general cosmic order. You need to have a Tzimtzum. Ukamoy Kain, and so too, Hamshacha b'b'chinas Tzimtzum, b'nekuda achas. So you need a concealment, and also you need the Hamshacha has to be, whatever is transmitting should be also a Tzimtzum in a nekuda achas. So I think what he's trying to say here is first you need a Tzimtzum of the higher Ur to become Chochma, and then in Chochma itself, it has to be nekuda achas, 1 point. The Zeu hayud the Shem Havaya. This is the Yud of Shem Havaya, Shubchinas Nekudas HaChochma. This is the spark, the point of Chochma. So he's referring us to volume 1. The first Maimer Zeis Chukas HaTeira, I see it's page 44 and on in volume 1. Hey, then comes the hey, where he's not spelling it out, but most likely means Binah, where you expand on this Nekuda. So the spark of the idea follows a Tzimtzum of, let's say, a collective superconscious state needs to go into a state of Tzimtzum that leads to the Yud of Chochma. Then comes an expansion. Va'avav hu chulu. It's interesting. He's not finishing the sentence. The Vav is the transmission, but he doesn't say it. He just says hu chulu. Okay, let me read on. Let me see. Maybe I'm just like he's very brief here. It sounds like he's quoting something. He's not quoting the full sentence. But let's see. Shezeu seder havoaz v'amshachas ha'er ve'efen sheyuchel yiskabel. Yeah, v'avav hu. Okay. Well, it clearly vav is transmission, but I'm not sure about vav hu, unless he means something with the word hu. No, doesn't sound. Anyway, regardless, this overall is the seder havaz v'amshachas ha'er be'efen sheyuchel yiskabel. Is the process, the order of how you draw and transmit oyer in a way that it could be received by a recipient. And these are the 4 steps of Yud Kei Vav Kei. He actually speaks about Yud and Hey. Vav, he doesn't even mention the last Hey. But I did explain it. So it's clear what it is. It's just I'm wondering why the Rebbe Rashab does say Vav Hu without saying more, but not sure. I have to look up if this is an actual quote, maybe from one of the Maimorim. I'm thinking one of the Maimorim, maybe, and he just quotes it briefly for some reason. Anyway, we call Zeh, and all of this, Hu ba'er the Seder HaYishtalshlus. This is all in the Seder HaYishtalshlus, in the cosmic order. Shebezet tzarich liyas Eitzah, where there you need advice and counsel and guidance. Eich yi hamshachas v'gili ha'er. Because that's what Seder HaYishtalshlus is. Seder HaYishtalshlus is like the structure of a building. As you build a building, you need someone who's guiding you. That's what you need people who oversee and are people who are giving the guidance and direction of how it should be built and how it should work. So Atzei Havaya, he's saying, is the Eitzah that of and say the shtalshus of how Havaya should manifest, how Chochma beHavaya should manifest through the Yud Kei Vav Kei. U'kamoi Kain, this is he talked about in Chochma and the Hey. U'kamoi Kain b'bchinas Zah. Shenikra Eitzah Sada. Now he's going back to Zah, Zohar Ampin, which is called the tree of the field. Because now, before he said Atzei Havaya, he referred it to Eitzah Chochma. So he says the same thing in Zah, which is called the tree in the field. Hariksiv mi bara ela. It says Su'umar menechem uru'u mi bara ela. There's an expression, me. Who created all of this? Me. The b'chinas me, shehu Binah, which we learned earlier as well, that me is Binah, when he said mi shemei misatzma. That was on the bottom of page 1251. So me is the level of Binah. Bara ela, shubchinas bara ela. Ela is 36. It's the Vav Ksav is the Zah. It's the 5 sides of Zohar Ampin. That's Ela. So me, bara Ela, the mother, me, Binah, gives birth to Ela, to Vav Ksavis. What's the connection to 36? Because 6 times 6 is 36. So when you talk about the Vav Ksavis, we're talking not Malchus now, talking about the 6 Midas. So Vav times Vav, Chesed, Gvurat, Teferes, Netzach, Yesod. He doubled that because in each one of them there's 6. So that's 36. Mi bara Ela. V'hainu, the b'chinas Atzei Havaya, Gili b'chinas Zah. So we know, summing up that this is the Atzei Havaya, the trees of Havaya, is the revelation of level of Zah, which is the level of Eitz. Mochin the Zah, and the mind, the intellect within Zah, Shem b'chinas Yichud Chitzeni, the Abba v'Ima. And that's the connection. Because we're not talking about Pnimius Chochma, we're talking about Chitzenius Chochma. And we also said that the world of Midas is not devoid of intelligence. He made that very clear. He made that clear at the bottom of page, well, in general we learned it, but especially at the bottom of page 1254, he said clearly that when you say Midas, does not mean there's no Mochin. Where was the expression? He said, this. You also need Mochin. Chitzeni is Binah. You need that because you need that to sustain and direct and guide the Midas. So they're not just completely removed. It's the Murgish Mitzad HaSeichel, if you recall. It's the Midas as they're guided by the Seichel. However, it's Seichel that's still from Chitzeni, Yichud Chitzeni of Abba ve'Ima as they relate to Midas. So that is Atzei Havaya. First of all, the interpretation Atzei Havaya from Zah, like the Ramaz explains the Zohar. Atzei Havaya, Havaya is in Gan Eden, and Zah in Gan Eden is the Atzei Havaya, the Midas that grow. And the second, the interpretation Atzei Havaya means Eitzah, is referring to Havaya, but also in the context of Havaya, the direction, Atzei from the word Eitzah, advice and counsel, in Chitzenius Chochma, that how it should manifest, and how it should, like a mother and father that guide its children, and how they should manifest, and how should the mind, the intellect guiding the emotions. This is, however, not Yichud Pnimi. It's not Yizbu'u. Okay, we're going to stop here, but I'll take any questions. And he's going to continue in the next paragraph, in 2 paragraphs, this discussion. It's not over yet. There's another paragraph just on this. And then on page 1257, he's going to go back to Yizbu. What's the sphere? What's the Tesva? What are we adding to these trees of Havaya? So he established now that Eitzah Havaya covers the picture of Zah, and how Mochin speaks to Zah, or how Mochin speaks to Midas, the Eitzah. So it covers that whole concept. Any questions?
So it would seem here that there's, when it says Atzei Havaya, there's 2 trees. And one would be the Eitzah that the Rabbi explained just now, which would be really more related to Binah and Chochma, the Seichel, and the Eitzah we learned yesterday of referring to Eitzah Sadeh growing in Midos. Couldn't you learn it that way? There's the two.
No, absolutely not. He just said not. He said V'hainu b'chinas Atzei Havaya gili b'chinas Zah u'Mochin de Zah and the b'chinas Yichud Chitzeni da'Avah. We're talking about one Eitzah Havaya, the trees of Havaya. He's explaining what these trees are. The trees are the trees of emotional growth that require intellectual investment. That's how he's explaining it. So it's true, yes, the Mochin are part of the growth of the Midas. The Mochin are guiding them.
Mochin as it is in Zah. Mochin as it comes down into Zah, you mean?
Yeah, Mochin de Zah, yeah. Which means Chitzenius of Chochma and Binah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
As I said yesterday, the main point is, and that's, I didn't look it up yet, but the main point is the main growth when you're talking to a human being is emotional growth. Even though the mind grows, but when you say the main focus of growth is emotional growth, and the mind helps because the mind matures as well and directs and guides the emotions. The interesting thing is he doesn't say that the Mochin are the Eitzah to the Midas. It's not that the Mochin are guiding and counseling and devising the Midas. It seems like what he's saying, Atzei Havaya, is that the Eitzah, the guidance, is also the Chochma and Binah. Chochma, rather, because it's talking about Eitzah in that Tzimtzum. Maybe he is meaning that. He doesn't say it explicitly, but it may be meaning that Eitzah is, because he says Atzei Havaya, that Atzei Havaya, Havaya b'Chochma, Atzei Havaya shetzrichen, Eitzah echi agili d'shem Havaya. I think I want to correct myself. It could be that's exactly what he means. Havaya is Chochma, and the Eitzah is how should the gili of Shem Havaya come down into Midas. So it's the Eitzah is ultimately how it should come down into Midas. That's the Yud Kei Vav Kei Tzimtzum, and then expansion and the Vav. I do understand why he doesn't bring the last hey here, because the Vav is Midas. The Vav is Zah. But the Eila, Vav Ksav is the Zah. So maybe that's why he says, right? The Vav Hu is still not clear to me, but it is the Eitzah of how Chochma comes down to. It's basically the wisdom and intelligence of how parents take care, how parents bring up their children. In this case, how Mochin guides and directs emotions, but it's not the Pnimius of Mochin, not Pnimius of Chochma Binah, which we're going to learn about later. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Fine, good. Now he's going to speak more about in the next paragraph. I'm sure some more things will be clarified. Any other questions? If not, we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on page 1256. Any questions? Okay, so we're stopping at the end of the paragraph, 12.